Hi butterflies, welcome to my garden. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe. And now let's get into the video. Hi everyone, it's your girl Calypso and I am back again. I'm back, I'm back, I'm back again, I'm back again, I'm back. Okay. I just feel very musical today. Like, if I'm hurt, I ain't gonna lie about it. I'm scruffed with the attitude, lips smiling. If I'm hurt, I ain't gonna lie about it. Necro with the attitude. Yeah. Shout out to Miss Ariana Grande. The Ariana Grande fans would know what song I was just humming. Okay. So, God. I'm gonna talk about something a little serious today. But I'm trying to keep it as light as I can. And this is the myth and misconceptions about trans people. And I'm going to talk about another myth, so number 2. And this myth is transgender people are mentally ill and potentially dangerous. Question, do I look like I'm mentally ill? I mean, I know I'm weird. I know I'm weird, but do I look dangerous? No? Okay, anyway, well, that's the myth about trans people. So, excuse me, I'm getting better. I would say that I'm getting better, but I'm still coughing at the moment. Getting that sorted, getting some treatment, so I'm getting better. So, just give me some time and I'll get there. So, first of all, I'm going to break down what mental illness is. So, by definition, right? Mental illness is a psychological state that causes significant distress and or disability. That's the definition of mental illness. Now, don't worry, it all makes sense. So that I just defined what mental illness is. Now, according to major medical organizations like the APA, the American Psychiatrists Association, and the AMA, that's the American Medical Association. Major medical organizations such as those 2 prestigious ones, they've all come out and said that they've all disputed, that argument that being trans is not a mental disorder. This is, like I said, 2 big prestigious medical organizations, the APA and the AMA. So, they've all disputed that claim that it's not a mental disorder. The APA, that's the American Psychiatrists Association, the APA has then taken a step further to explain explicitly that people need to stop referring to it as a gender identity disorder in favor of calling it a gender dysphoria, in order to get rid of the stigma with the label that gender identity disorder comes with. Because when you say gender identity disorder, that's when it starts to sound like a mental illness, almost like saying that someone is schizophrenic or someone is bipolar or someone has a personality disorder. So it's almost put in the same, it's almost like cut off from a similar fabric when you put it that way, or in the same lane, if you may. So they're trying to discourage people from calling it that and instead use gender dysphoria just to get rid of that stigma and use a label that's more appropriate, and consistent with the familiar clinical sexology terminology, which is gender dysphoria. So now, gender dysphoria basically is just that, is a state of dissatisfaction or uncontentment with the gender that you were assigned at birth. It's a dissociation where you don't mentally associate with the gender that's assigned you at birth. So therefore, you God, I sound very croaky and I sound very hoarse. So therefore, you don't necessarily, you don't mentally align with that gender that was assigned at birth. You're more associated with the opposite gender or the opposite sex, if you may. And so therefore, you take medical steps in some cases, or in a lot of cases, you take steps to then correct that defect, I guess, to correct the defect, or to correct that malfunction, if you may, you know. So it could be medically transitioning, it could be socially transitioning, it could be just, there are different forms of transitioning. It's not always medical. So, but however, transitioning is the main treatment for it, while keeping in mind that being trans isn't the medical condition, but the solution. Like being trans, transitioning is the solution, it's not the medical condition. Does that make any sense? Okay. So, now, each person is individual, each person's like experience, or each person's gender dysphoria is different. Each individual, they vary. You know, some people experience a mild dysphoria, some people barely get any dysphoria, where they're okay. You know, I mean, they don't necessarily connect, but it's not a big it's not a big source of distress. It's not a source of misery, you know. Some people barely experience any gender dysphoria, some people are mild dysphoria, and then they're the ones who experience a high level of gender dysphoria, where they're practically dysfunctional, you know. And I'm not going to name any names or give any examples, but I'm only just going to use myself as an example. Now, I experienced a mild case of gender dysphoria where prior to transitioning, I just went through a period of time where I was just not happy. You know, I was still functional, I was still going through the world, but I just kept fantasizing and thinking of how, you know, my life would have turned out differently if I wasn't born male at birth, you know. So that's just my personal experience with it. So I wouldn't say it's a high dysphoria where I'm practically dysfunctional, but there was a sense of a cognitive dissonance between my actual self versus my ideal self, which was being a woman, versus my real self, which was not necessarily how I was born, you know. There was a cognitive dissonance there. So it made me a little bit unhappy. Yeah, but I wouldn't say I was miserable and depressed and completely down, although there's some girls who experience that and their feelings are completely valid, and it's okay to not be okay, and it's okay to also take steps to correct that situation. It's okay to transition in order to come up with, it's okay to take steps to find a resolve, which is what transitioning is. So now, because that's complicated, isn't it? I hope I'm able to make sense and make it a little bit understandable to whoever is able to resonate with what I'm saying. So, yeah, that's that. And then, you know, that whole myth about how trans people are mentally ill also, again, pop culture also plays a role in that, in feeding into that. Because, when you look at movies like, my favorite one to talk about, Silence of the Lambs. When you look at a character like Buffalo Bill, now that was just a sick individual, because he was actually harming women. He was actually just attacking these women, and I think that also feeds into that stereotype that girls like me are predators, and that's the potential danger. That's where that myth comes from, of us being potentially dangerous, because you have examples of people like this, and you know, it just leads into that, and it doesn't really alleviate the myth. It doesn't really help to squash that myth or to resolve that myth. It just feeds into it. So Silence of the Lambs is an example of a movie that fed into that misconception. Another example goes as far back as Alfred Hitchcock. His name tickles me every time. he almost had an obsession with trans people because he just kept portraying us in the most dangerous negative light that kinds of fit into that mentally disturbed individual who's like a predator, who's combative, who is dangerous, who is yeah. he, Alfred Hitchcock is a classic case of somebody who was just, he had an obsession. And yeah, so like that movie Psycho, where Norman Bates, Norman Bates and Psycho. Now, there's some people who argue that, oh, he was just a mentally deranged cross-dresser, but I think there's some trans elements to it with that cognitive dissonance plays into it as well. So that's an example that you can also go by. Norman Bates from Psycho. Now, Alfred Hitchcock, I don't want to go into his whole filmography, but he had an obsession with us. Like, oh, Mr. Alfie, what's the tea? What's really the tea? Anyway, who knows? I wasn't there. All I can do is read and go according to what I've read. And from what I've read and what I've seen, he had an obsession. Not necessarily the healthy one, but yeah, he had an obsession. Now, another example is like the character that Michael Caine played in that movie, Dressed to Kill, with Angie Dickinson, where he's, again, this trans person or this trans figure, not a very attractive looking trans person, by the way, but this trans figure who murders somebody. And there's this sense of mental disconnect between this character who kills somebody versus the other real person who was a man, and I think he was a therapist of some sort, but then he also had his alter ego who was a murderous cross-dresser trans person, so not to say that all these characters are necessarily trans, but those pop culture references feeds into the perception, and then people buy it. Like over and over, there's a lot of people who are already ignorant. They see these images and then they think of girls like me as that. And so that's what lends itself to that myth and misconception about us being mentally ill and potentially dangerous. And so therefore we should all get rounded up and, I guess, thrown into the loony bin or something. Would that make you people happy? Anyway, so that's just another example. And yeah, ultimately we're not going anywhere. We're here to stay, and people need to look. My daddy used to say knowledge is power, and I think people really need to read and understand and educate themselves. Like, make it a point to befriend a trans person, befriend trans people, and then have conversations, open-minded conversations where there's an open dialogue, and you'll be surprised how much you learn. You'll be surprised how much you might share in common with this person that you were taught to be afraid of. And this is just fear-mongering, that this is just fear-mongering that dates back as far along as possible, as far along as I don't know, but it's just fear-mongering. And yeah, I'm trying to keep it light because I don't want to go too dark into it. So that's myth number 2 that I've discussed today. And yeah, let me know your thoughts. By the way, sidebar, I am serving some serious forehead today. I am going back to the motherland, honey. This forehead, oof, oh yes. Shout out to Rihanna, shout out to Tyra Banks, shout out to Mariah Carey. I'm giving some serious forehead today. But okay, it's all mine and it's mine. Okay, it's all mine and I love it. It is what it is. Anyway, so thank you very much for tuning in to me running my mouth again. Hope you were able to learn something. And look, you shouldn't be afraid of trans people. We're just trying to survive and win at life. We're just trying to maneuver and go through society and go through the world and do something with ourselves. Something positive for the most part. As long as we're not hurting anyone, you don't have anything to be afraid of. Like for me, I just mind my business and run my mouth on YouTube. I have a job. I get up in the morning, go to work, and I mind my business. I don't bother anyone. So, and I think there's a lot of people, men and women, trans men and trans women, who are also living that same kind of life where they just want to be left alone. They don't want to be bothered and they don't bother anyone. So just, yeah, we're not mentally ill and we're not dangerous. Most of us, at least, there aren't that many. It's not any different from cisgender people anyway in terms of mental illness and potential danger. It's not that different from cis people anyway, or biological men and women anyway. So, yeah. Thank you for watching me run my mouth again. I know I already said that, but thanks for tuning in, and I hope you learned something. So please protect your energy, be kind, keep the peace, and be kind to one another. So thank you, and I'll see you soon. Bye. Mwah.